If you're just joining, welcome. My name is Clara Parker. I am Director of Global Exchange at Urban Design Forum, and I'm joined here today by Guillermo Gomez, who's the Director of Programs at Urban Design Forum. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Guillermo to talk to us and introduce Urban Design Forum.
Fantastic. Do you hear me just well, Clara?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Guillermo Gomez, Director of Programs at Urban Design Forum. We're so thrilled to welcome a new round of fellows to apply to our Global Exchange Fellowship and continue our inquiry into cities around the world making big swings on housing. So if you're still getting to know us, Urban Design Forum's mission is to connect and inspire New Yorkers to design, build, and care for a better city. And what makes our organization unique is that we are a part think tank, project incubator, and professional community. And we discuss ideas for the future and also put them into action. That's the next slide, Clara. And then we also work across 6 issue areas on the following slide, recognizing that a healthy neighborhood requires a stable home, dignified workplace, safe commutes, and lively public spaces. Next slide, please. And another unique thing about us is that we think and work across different scales, from the very local and neighborhood level to citywide to globally, in order to bring our learnings to New York City. And we have over 1,000 members working across the public and private sectors in planning, policy, and design and development. And we foreground our interdisciplinary community as our strength. And through our public events and our mailing list, we reach over thousands of New Yorkers every year. Next slide, please. So to give a better sense of what we do, I just want to share and highlight a few of our projects in recent work. On the left, you'll see a policy conversation we hosted with Council Member Sandy Nurse, who introduced a bill to establish a long-term citywide public bathroom strategy, a bill really informed by research from our fellows on public restroom access, maintenance, and design. And on the right column, you'll see an image from our first ever Sunnyside Night Market, a vibrant public installation we helped bring to life, led by Sunnyside Shine's bid beneath the 7-train aqueduct as part of our local center initiative. And then at the center, you'll find our latest mayoral platform, a set of ideas shaped by years of fellowship work and refined through a series of issue-focused workshops this past winter. So this is just a kind of a glimpse of the work that we do, but it highlights the breadth and range of what we do. So I'm going to pass it back to Clara just to dive into our Big Swings Fellowship.
Great. Thanks so much, Guillermo. And we will also be joined today, I think I see one person so far, one of the 2024 Global Fellows. So with us now is Nicole Blado Torres, who is a affordable housing architect and advocate, and also the co-chair of the AIA New York Housing Committee, who will talk with us a little bit later. And I also see Malin Mehta with different names on their profiles. Malin is the New York director of the Regional Plan Association, and both were fellows in our last cohort and going to talk to us about their experience. So just a little bit about Global Exchange. Global Exchange is Urban Design Forum's venue for really collaborating with our peers from around the world. Through events hosting global leaders in New York City, study trips, and the fellowship, which we're here to talk about today, Global Exchange connects New York civic community to our peers around the world with the goal of inspiring creative change around shared challenges from housing and infrastructure to health and resilience. So one question we get a lot is, why not just focus on New York City? And I will say that most of Urban Design Forum's programming does focus solely on New York City. From our Next New York, Forefront, and New City Critics Fellowships to our public programming and advocacy work, like some of the recent initiatives that Guillermo mentioned. All of these really focus on New York City. Global Exchange, on the other hand, really aims to build relationships with other cities who face similar challenges and often approach them in really different ways. Because cities outside the United States have such different political, economic, cultural differences, we know we can't simply take ideas that we find in our research from other places and transplant them here. So the goal is really to understand the cultural and political shifts behind changes, behind bold solutions, so that we can see other possibilities to our most intractable problems here in New York City. And we at Urban Design Forum, we believe really strongly, especially now, that it's important to keep building bridges internationally where we can. So now I'll go into a little more detail about the fellowship. So the 2025 cohort, in many ways, is year two of the cohort that was launched for the first time last year. We are continuing to focus on housing, and the fellowship has these three main components. We have the study trip that happens toward the beginning of the fellowship, the learning and workshop days where we come together in person, and fellow-led research and outputs. And we'll go into a little more about each of those. At this point, I do want to invite Malin to talk a little bit about the study trip. And I'll say, just to start you off, Malin, that just like last year, this year, the study trip happens toward the beginning of the fellowship and really serves as a launch pad for the rest of the fellowship. It's the first time, one of the first times we get together in person, and we don't know each other that well before we go on this trip, and then are completely immersed in a different place together for a few days and have a really intense learning experience. And Mullen, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what we did in Berlin, what you got out of the trip, and yeah, what role it has in this fellowship.
Sure. Not sure why I'm saying it says Hadley Stack, but there we go. Hi everyone. Thanks, Clara, for letting me talk about this. So as Clara said, I think it is a really immersive experience. I think it's really important for folks to get outside of a New York context and really just sort of be in this space. I mean, anyone I haven't done study abroad, but folks that have, I think it's a similar experience, just really kind of stepping away from your day to day and learning something new. For us, the UDF team really put together an incredibly robust agenda. It started with a conversation with the Berlin Senate, with folks that are focused on addressing housing challenges in Berlin. And, I think that's really important. You get a sense of how do different governments really understand the issues around housing and how do they view their role around housing. I think that really gets to this point that Clara made earlier about like really trying to think about how different cultures, different countries are grappling with this issue. We were also able to check out model projects around the city. So one we looked at was House Der Statistik. It was a collaboration between the government and community groups that were working to transform a fairly large vacant building into a mixed-use space that included social housing, artist studios, spaces for other craft makers and community facilities. And it was great to hear from them about sort of what they're grappling with when it comes to building community buy-in, working with the government to make sure that the goals of the community groups are met and things like that. There were also some fun activities that helped us explore the city. We were able to bike around Tempelhofer Feld. It's a park in Berlin that is similar in size to Central Park. And there we were able to meet with folks on either side of the conversation of maybe introducing housing to parts of that site. That was really interesting because of parallels that we have here in New York in terms of like fighting over community space and where we should build and how much. Over there, over a decade ago, the community voted in a referendum to prevent basically anything from being built. It's a World War II airfield. It has runways and green spaces. They wanted no additional park features and they wanted no building of any housing. But now that Berlin is going through a housing crisis, they've introduced a design competition to think about how they can balance both open space and housing. And as you can imagine, it's not easy to get community groups and community members that have been sort of on the side of preserving that space to, really focus on the issues around housing and maybe open this space up for new development. For those, so I was in the new arrivals working group. And so the study trip offered an opportunity for each of the working groups to also, find different groups and experts within the host country that might be able to speak to this issue. So for us, the day before the formal program started, Hallie in my working group was able to organize a walking tour with a refugee that has been involved in the refugee movement in Kreuzberg, which is like a center of political movement and resistance in Berlin. we were able to connect also with the Expert Council on Integration and Migration that does a lot of research on how asylum seekers are accommodated throughout Germany. And that gave us a good sense of sort of how the EU thinks about the issues around asylum seekers versus the US, how they accommodate resources, how they think about kind of moving people around so that different countries take on different responsibilities. So, I think I mean, didn't necessarily provide a silver bullet, but gave us a good sense of sort of the different approaches that are there. And then, I think just lastly, I'll say, beyond the meaty conversations and site visits, obviously this is a time to have fun and, as Clara said, connect with your cohort. We were able to take in some of the sites, eat and drink our way around the city. Some of us, managed to have enough energy to check out the Berlin nightclubs. And I think, if you're going to go on this study trip, definitely take some days on either side of the program time to really immerse yourself in the city and take that chance to explore it.
Great. Thank you so much, Mullen. So for the 2025 Big Swings cohort, we will be going to Tokyo, September 8th to 12th. And similar to Berlin, it's really a mix of meeting with government, civic, and on-the-ground leaders in housing in the city. If you know Dan McPhee, Urban Design Forum's executive director, he's actually in Japan now, going to Tokyo later this month to start meeting with people and set up our site visits. We're really looking forward to the trip. And it, again, is, it's not the only city we're looking at throughout the course of the fellowship, but it does set the tone for how do we start to look at a place that's really different from New York City and yet has so many of the same challenges. From here, I want to talk a little bit about the learning and workshop days and then pass it over to Nicole. The learning days are really like the meat and potatoes of the fellowship. That's where we spend the most number of hours together physically in person. The learning days are really crafted by each of the working groups who connect with New York City leaders, connect with global leaders, and then take their peers on an experiential day. We're exploring, in these learning days, we're exploring the housing topic from each working group's perspective, right? So last year, Mullen mentioned he was in the Welcoming New Arrivals group. Nicole here was in the Building Buy-in group. But it also really offers the opportunity for each of the groups to see how their topics are connecting. So Nicole, I would love for you at this point to share a little bit, not just about your own group's learning day, which is a great place to start, but just learning days in general, like what did you get out of those and what can people expect?
Yeah, thanks, Clara. And it's so nice to see so many people attending this session, some familiar names and a lot of new names, which is always incredibly to see. We are sort of a very large and growing community of individuals who are interested in housing. And I would say that one thing that's really special about this fellowship is having the chance to be in a large group with such a range of experiences, both personal and professional. My group, the Building Buy-in group, included a lawyer and a social worker, people working in the public sector and nonprofit space, and myself as an architect, all sort of sharing ideas. It's a rare chance outside of, say, like a project-specific work experience to really get to sort of explore ideas with such a wide range of peers and learn from them. So I do say that this learning day experience was so great because not only did we get to work together to develop these unique sessions, but these were full 8-hour days. So unlike, a lot of the, say, convening that we get to do in conferences or, over at, our various professional realms with 2-hour lectures, the sort of top-down approach, or even say like mixers, this was a chance to really explore a theme deeply and from different perspectives. So there was every chance we got, what was this, 3 to 4 weeks, we would get to regroup and have a full day of learning from one another. And it was the richest experience of education I've ever had, definitely more exciting and interesting than my graduate school experience. And also fun to come to these spaces with, our decades of work experience and see where we are as individuals and sort of how ready we are to learn new things. So the learning day that we had earlier this year for Building Buy-in was an interesting topic because it's not particularly concrete, so what does it mean to build buy-in? We do this, in every sort of aspect of our work at different scales, but really thinking about, what are the ways that we can make a paradigm shift in how we think and talk about and support housing in New York City. So we got to spend a full day in Gowanus. We were hosted in the morning. The first sort of session of that day was with Michelle Delauz of the Fifth Avenue Committee and learning from her team about, the nearly decade worth of coalition building and community support that they were involved in and still are involved in, and sort of the creation of the Gowanus rezoning plan. So incredible lessons learned around patience and resilience in this work, which many of us know firsthand, but so great to hear other voices. And we then spent most of the rest of the day at the Van Allen Institute. They recently moved, let's say, over the pandemic to Gowanus, opened their doors to us, and we had an incredible chance to meet with their team and learn about how they're sort of building relationships in their new community, their new home, and then had the chance to use that space to facilitate different conversations, including a panel with different thought experts around City of Yes, for housing opportunity, fireside chat. You saw a photo earlier of me and Borough President Antonio Reynoso chatting about what it means to be a bold leader and help support housing while still remaining engaged in community, really striking that balance, which I think many of us walked away feeling refreshed and inspired to think that this is actually more achievable than we imagine, and that we do need energetic thought leaders and leadership, political leaders to help us make this work happen. So especially as we're thinking about various elections and sort of making our way through a very challenging year, still having the chance to feel very hopeful about how we can do this work. And I think I'll leave it at that. We've got to play games, and each session was totally different. You see a variety of those experiences here, a lot of walking tours and site visits, an opportunity for deep conversation exploration, both with visitors, but also just the cohort themselves, reflecting on a theme together.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. And I do see Sadia here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sadia Rahman, who is the Deputy Director of Policy for Chaya at CDC, another one of the 2024 Global Fellows who can pick up from where Nicole left off and talk more about her experience.
Hey everyone, can you see me? I'm on here. Okay, great.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Clara. So my name's Sadia, and I was in a cohort called Deepening Affordability. There was actually of our group, there was affordability, so I was deepening affordability too. And our group comprised of some legal aid attorneys, myself, folks in philanthropy, folks in government. Um, and we are sort of like journey around trying to decide what we were going to focus on for our learning day and for our case studies, which I think we'll talk about later. Was like an evolution, but I think as the learning day that went last, I think where we landed was really thinking through what are the systems in New York City that exacerbate just like this idea of supply and demand, right? We clearly don't have enough supply and we need to develop more. And New York City is a unique city in which we have tremendous pressures to displace people, and how that sort of intersects with the idea of development and developing new affordable and more additional affordable housing. And so we really wanted to sort of like unpack that together. And the way we did it was our cohort decided to sort of like bring everybody to Manhattan Housing Court for the morning. And so we divided everybody up. We gave them assignment sheets, told them which rooms to go to, and spend about 20 to 30 minutes in each courtroom, sort of like looking at how this system in New York City interacts with how we think about affordability in New York City. And so folks saw people getting evicted, people saw people who had arrears for like 20, 30, $40,000 that they couldn't pay. Folks who had no cooking gas or no heat, and were suing the landlord. And I think it gave folks sort of an insight into something that is sort of like uniquely New York, a system that plays out for sort of the working poor in New York City and how it like just development alone will not sort of solve the crisis, right? And so after that, our learning day, we went to the legal aid office and spent some time debriefing on our observations of what we saw, and we brought in some experts and to help. And some of those experts are here today, which is great. And I hope they do it. So do this experience. We brought in organizers and folks who have been in and out of housing court and understand sort of how this all works to help sort of process what they had seen, because sometimes housing court can be kind of traumatic. And so we wanted to give people an outlet to talk about their observations, and we did that and hear from the experts who've been navigating that work for a very long time. And then our day ended with a panel discussion um, of experts who had taken their own sort of big swings in New York City to solve the affordable housing crisis. So Professor Andy Scherer, who helped build the Right to Counsel Coalition, Molly Sims, who's um, the deputy of DSS, all came together to sort of like talk about big swings that they have taken in the city. And so, that was how we sort of walked away from the learning day, giving folks sort of like both um, sort of an insight into sort of how things happen in the city and sort of like how to use that to sort of take a big swing to solve these problems. And it was amazing. It was great.
Thank you so much, Sadia. And thank you, Mullen and Nicole. We're going to hear a little bit more from you in a bit. I just want to highlight the real strength of this fellowship is the cohort. 48 housing leaders in New York City. That network that gets built is huge. And I think the three of them really speak to that. With that, I want to share about this last component of the fellowship, which is the research and outputs. So a lot of time is spent in the fellowship with your working group, right? So we heard from 3 members of 3 different working groups, really connecting with different cities around the world, connecting with New York City leaders, planning out their learning day, planning out, what is the topic that they want to look at, and what are solutions that they find around the world. And for this past cycle, the fellows published a compilation of their case studies. So like, what are some best practices from around the world? Whether in in the similar format of a publication, we will at Urban Design Forum support this next cohort to somehow make their findings and research public, whether that's through op-eds, through presentations, and part of that will get decided by the cohort themselves. So you can see this year's report on our website. It's a great example. It's not necessarily the same format that will come out of the next cohort. So what I will do now is talk a little bit about, why join this fellowship. So what we offer through it, many things, join for many reasons. Here are a few. You can build your network. That cohort is such a strong part of it. There's the component of producing original research, creating civic change, whether that's through, an organization or group you're already a part of, or building a new coalition through this. I think we saw some of that happening in this year's capstone. And I'm looking at you, Nicole, of starting to build a coalition with the people who came to the breakout sessions. There's a real component here of developing personal and professional leadership. I think the idea for mid-career professionals to have a space to take a step back and at that point in their careers be able to really think about what they're doing in a different way, have the space away from work is a huge piece of this. And then lastly, leveraging the membership of the whole organization. So you saw Guillermo talk about in the beginning, it's a really big network. And when you sign up to be a fellow, whether or not you're already a UDF member, you are now a part of the network too. And then it also takes work to get those things out of the fellowship. So what we ask for from everyone who signs up is to really look at this as an opportunity to build together. This is a group of people that is intentionally looking at the issue of housing from many different angles. And that's rare and also challenging. And we strive to work collaboratively through that, respect differences in all shapes and forms. I just mentioned like the professional kind and also just bringing rigor and creativity. The goal of this is to really think differently and to be inspired to try new things in New York City. And I would love to turn back to Malin, Sadia, and Nicole just to share any other thoughts you have, whether it's what you got out of the fellowship, what you came in looking for, why someone else who's at this stage in their career would want to consider applying for this program. And any one of you could start. So, Sadia, go for it.
Sure. Um, I think I said this to Claire the last time we talked, is, for a lot of us at this point in our career, we're sort of in the trenches doing the work day to day, and don't often in our problem solving for folks and like trying to like put out the fires. And that's kind of where you are mid-career, right? Like you have enough expertise in something and you're sort of just in the grind of getting the work done, and still sort of like passionate about the subject matter and the work, but don't get often enough opportunity to like take a break, breathe, zoom out, and think big picture and remind yourself like why you love this work. And I think that's what this fellowship opportunity provided for me. It was really great, and it kind of, like I said to Claire, it scratched an itch I didn't know I had, right? And I think it was really great to sort of spend some time getting to know other people who are equally passionate about solving this crisis, and put our heads together and ideate and think through and plan, and learn new things. And if what I am saying resonates with you, because I think you are in a very similar boat, I think this can be really, like an eye-opening and wonderful experience, to sort of allow yourself, to gift yourself the opportunity to like travel, go figure out what like Tokyo is doing, and then bring all of that information back home and think sort of zoom out and think big picture for a little while. So that's what was really important to me about this experience, and I hope you guys would get the same thing out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Sadia said. I think, we talked about this on our closing day, Clara, but I think there's like two buckets, I think related to what Sadia was saying. I think one is, as folks engage in this work on a day to day, we're able to bring that to a different audience. So all of us are in our own roles attacking this problem, but we may not be looking at it from the same lens or what have you. And this allowed us to put it on the table. Here's how I'm thinking about it. Here are the challenges I'm grappling with day to day when trying to address the housing crisis, and allows us to learn from each other. I mean, as Nicole said, I mean, you have developers, lawyers, organizers, policy folks, I mean, researchers, what have you, all working together. And we don't always talk to each other on a day-to-day basis. In my role, I do mostly policy work. I don't really understand all the construction challenges that come from building affordable housing, but we saw a lot of projects and experiences through Berlin and Learning Day to really understand that. And that's helpful for me as I think about, okay, what are the levers I can work on in my day-to-day that actually address some of these other things that maybe we don't talk about internally, but are something that's creating a roadblock to getting things done. And I think the other part of it that Sadia touched on, I think for me, I work at an organization that's been around for 100 years, and there's a lot of times where I don't necessarily feel like I feel like I'm ushering somebody else's ideas or insights forward and not necessarily critically evaluating them, stepping back, trying to form my own ideas around the topic. And the fellowship really gave me a chance to do that, to really step away from my role and kind of embody this kind of bright-eyed view of this issue, kind kind of in a way that, going into grad school and learning about something new does. And that's why, this was incredible for me. And I think for my organization, I think just being able to take what we did throughout the fellowship back to the organization, whether it's, everything Clara went through, whether it's the network, whether it's the cohort, whether it's the examples that folks researched throughout uh, the case studies and big swings, all of that will serve us collectively as we try and, address this problem in a new way going forward. So I just think it's an incredible opportunity. You're not going to find, as I said earlier, a silver bullet necessarily, maybe in Tokyo or in Berlin, but you start to think about how we can maybe, if we broke open the way we normally think about things, what else is possible? And I think that's the real advantage of the fellowship. And a new network, new friends. I'm so happy to have met everybody in this cohort. And as you get older, it's harder to make friends. And so this was really, really exciting.
Yeah, you're second and third, everything that my colleague said. I would say that when I see this on the slide, rigor, I really think of the word depth. Like there's a depth at which we get to work on these topics, a depth with which we get to know our peers. This is more than networking, as Mullen says. And it's even more than friendship in that you really get to understand what people do beyond the title, beyond whatever you think that sort of surface reads. Like get to finally sort of ask those questions of like, what does it mean to, fill in the blank? What does that look like day to day? And like, maybe that's an opportunity for collaboration, for sort of support and assistance as we're thinking about the work that we're all doing. We are still, likely a bit more siloed outside of the fellowship, but now we have, 48 people that we can call on to help us, right? To help us really think about this work in a different way. And I love that. I think, again, as I said, earlier with the 8-hour fellowship, with the fact that we met so regularly, I want to sort of make it clear, like there is a time commitment. It's totally worth every minute that you spend in the fellowship. And I think that, being able to be present and to really like seek the depth of experience would make your, that 8 months feel like, years worth of sort of work and support.
Thank you so much, Nicole, Mullen, Sadia. Yeah, it's like I could share, but it's better to hear it from the people who actually went through the experience. I'm going to share a couple just like almost like logistical pieces of the program, and then we'll move into questions. So this is like a continuation in many ways from the first cohort looking at housing, with 6 new topics that have intentionally come out of the first cohort. A lot of this came out of either unanswered questions or research that led to, why aren't we looking at things this way? So that's just a little bit of how these topics came out. The first year's topics came out of the surveying of about 80 New York City housing leaders. Like, what are the most pressing issues and possibilities for change? So this year we'll be looking at unleashing supply, how our government's transforming zoning, building codes, and approval processes to create density across entire cities. Planning for neighborhood mix, how are cities balancing housing development with open space, infrastructure, workplaces, and other uses to build livable neighborhoods outside the urban core. Adapting homes, how are cities updating building codes, transforming planning procedures, and retrofitting homes to achieve climate resilience. Building for demographic shifts, how are changing family sizes, aging residents, and growing populations changing the delivery of new housing types. Energizing social housing, how are governments and resident-led movements building and preserving permanently affordable homes. And embracing housing for all, how are cities enshrining a right to housing through public policy, tenant protections, and cultural values. So you'll see these 6 topic areas in the application, and you're going to be asked to rank your choices because you will elect to be in one of these working groups throughout the course of the fellowship. I want to go into who should apply. You've heard from Sadia, Mullen, and Nicole about what they, as at this point in their career, have gotten out of it. And so think about, where are you? Are you in sort of like the 10 to 25 years of experience? These are not hard and fast rules. We really will consider people outside of that. But we also have other programs at Urban Design Forum that are for more emerging professionals. So if you have just a couple years of experience, this likely isn't the best fit for you. But when in doubt, email me and I'll share that at the end, or go ahead and apply. This is for people with a deep interest in the intersections of housing and design, development, policy, law, advocacy, journalism, construction, and philanthropy, but also other areas. So we had an economist in this cohort. We had people who do direct service in supportive housing. So if your work intersects with housing and you don't see yourself named there, please name yourself and join us. And then we really welcome women and gender expansive people, people of color, LGBTQIA2S plus people, people with disabilities, and professionals with experience in diverse community settings. You're all strongly encouraged to apply. And again, none of this is hard and fast. Reach out and see if this, is the right fit for you. And then I want to talk about tuition because this is a tuition-based program. The full tuition is $5,900, which covers the cost of not only all that programming in New York City, but the study trip to Tokyo and all of the programming that goes on there. The additional cost of travel and accommodations for this study trip are assumed by participants, so airfare, hotels, etc. We do provide a lot of the meals during the study trip, and again, all of the programming. With that said, scholarships are available for this program. Many people in the first cohort did apply for need-based scholarships and received them. So if cost is a barrier, we really encourage you to still apply. And with that, I'm going to move us into Q&A. So think about if you have a question for, if you want to ask one of the fellows, if you have a general question, go ahead and we will try to get through as many as possible. And I'll ask Guillermo to help moderate.
Sounds good. So a couple earlier questions in the chat that I kind of will just throw at you, Claire. One on eligibility from Lionel here. Can people based overseas apply to the fellowship? And realistically, do applicants need to be based in New York City? And what is the New York-based time commitment?
Yes, so that is a requirement that you either live or work in New York City to be considered for the program. And if you are interested in, if you are outside of the United States now and are interested in joining any of our programs, I would actually encourage you to look at our other study trips. We have one coming up to Copenhagen, and that's open to anyone, anywhere. But for this fellowship, you do need to be based in New York City.
Great. Another question here from Maria. Can we choose what topics we dive into, or do we all work on all of them? All of the topics. So I guess, yeah, maybe share a little bit more on the working group and group process.
Great. And then I'm going to lean on some of the 2024 fellows to help me talk through what this actually looked like. So you do at the beginning choose, and you're identifying one of those subtopics to be in that working group. And that's where you're going to plan the learning day with your team. You're going to explore that topic really in depth. The space of the learning days is designed to be that space of exchange. So where you get to learn about all of the topics, but you're not necessarily responsible for conducting research on all of those 6 topics. And if Nicole or Malin or Sadia want to explain more how that worked, you could go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it varied from group to group, but we self-organized and had to find ways to communicate and collaborate, divide the work or sort of find ways to make the entire group be able to work productively on the various deliverables, and beyond the deliverables, really just creating space to explore the topic and get to know one another. So again, that's all sort of outside of the sort of organized time that the group spends together. So that's sort of the above and beyond time, but again, really important for making these research opportunities work.
I would also go back to that word Nicole used earlier around depth. The idea being like you're going really deep into a particular component of housing, less so than broad, right? It's not a survey for each person about, finding out a little bit of each of these things. You're really spending that time exploring one subtopic pretty deeply. All right, let's go to the next question.
So the attendees are a little shy today, and I
Oh.
think those are all the 2 questions into the chat. Though I imagine there's a lot more, so definitely encourage some folks to add in these last couple minutes.
You can
But I
also,
don't.
if you want to, yeah, if we don't have too many in the chat, we'd also welcome people to get on the mic and ask out loud if you would like.
Okay, we see one here. Lots of questions from Terry, but I hope I didn't miss this. Can someone speak to the time commitment? Yes. And how much time are you spending per week on research? How are you slotted into the working groups? Probably towards the beginning of the fellowship. And then if one topic has lots of interest, how do you decide who gets to work on that? So maybe we start off maybe with time commitment first. Maybe from you, Clara, how you've been estimating, and definitely open it up to the previous Big Swings fellows on that experience. And then I can go into some of the additional questions afterwards.
Sure. So you can see on the website now and in the application the in-person dates that are already scheduled, and those are full days. So I forget exactly how many there are, but it's like expect those days to be 9 to 5 in person somewhere in New York City. We write as a general guidance that you should expect to spend an additional 4 hours a week throughout the course of the fellowship, doing things like meeting with your working group, planning out your learning day, setting up and having Zoom calls with your global experts that you're connected to. I think the 4 hours is probably for some weeks more like an hour, and for weeks where you're doing things like planning your learning day more. And I'll let the fellows talk a little bit about their experience with the time commitment, and then I'll go back to the other questions in that one. Oh, Mullen,
you
I
guys hear
can't
me?
hear you. Oh, now we can hear you.
Better. We didn't average the hours, but like we had separate from the official days, we had weekly 1 hour check-ins as a cohort, as a working group. Some groups, and I think Sadia or Nicole can maybe speak to this, some groups split up more formally, like who tackles the case studies and research, who tackles the learning day. Our working group was a little bit more organic across all fronts. But I think, a lot of intensity around the learning days and getting things scheduled. Clara and the UDF team were really helpful in kind of ushering us along, providing resources where we needed it and all of that. And then obviously when there's like project deliverables and stuff, there's time there that needs to be stepped up to make sure we hit all that. But I think the earlier in the time of the fellowship that you kind of get those logistics in place and like develop a working relationship with everybody in your working group, it felt like, at least for me, my experience was things felt pretty seamless and organic in a good way. I'll let Nicole or Sadia talk about their
Yeah, I
experiences.
mean, we've all worked in groups, so there's advantages and disadvantages, but the beauty of it being, we were 7, but I think all the other groups were 8, is that there are many different ways that you can share space and time. I agree with that, my team met 1 hour to 2 hours a week formally, and then, each of us sort of working independently on what we were going to then bring to that next meeting, either independently or in small groups, depending on what the deliverable was. The beauty of the large group is that when you need to tap out, you just communicate effectively and, everyone else got your back, right? So I think it's just a matter of sort of building those, having a sense. And I think, we were the first cohort. So now we can reflect and say, this is what seemed to work. And, you guys can sort of then build upon that or adapt it as you see fit. But yeah, certainly I would say like 2 to 4 hours a week, depending on how much you wanted to get in the weeds on things. Yeah, lots of fun.
So
Go ahead, Patty.
Oh no, I don't have anything to add. I think it was summarized pretty clearly. I think the only thing I would add is you could build in, and I think we did in our group, like we spent a lot of time at the beginning just sort of learning from each other and talking about like each other's expertise. and that added time to sort of like the allotted time, because I think we were just really interested in learning from each other and sharing like what we knew and asking each other a lot of questions about our work. And so that may, you may elect to sort of spend a little bit more time on that at the beginning. And that's what my group elected to do.
Another great question, I think, directly for the fellows here from Charlie is, for the fellows, how did this go over with your workplace? So you mentioned it enriched your work, but yeah, how did the organizations that you're coming from or from the firms kind of think of this work? Was it complementary, supportive, or kind of a maybe more, I guess, independent project? Again, I'm paraphrasing for Charlie, but it's in the chat. So yeah, how did this relate to your kind of existing work and the organizations you're coming from?
Speaking for myself, I was fully supported by RPA to do that. I mean, we're doing a lot of work around housing, and so this felt like a natural fit. That said, there wasn't any sort of expectation on, what they placed on me for this. They let me, as long as I'm getting the rest of my work done, they had no problem with me taking the time needed to participate. I think everybody's experience is different, and I think just to the point about time commitment, I think, you saw the expected level of work experience, professional experience you should have going into this fellowship. And there's an understanding from everybody here, like if people need to step out, if they can't commit to a certain day, like people get together, just like if somebody calls out sick at work or is out on vacation, like you figure it out, you work together, you make it happen. So I think as long as you don't, I mentioned it being like a little wide-eyed like grad school, but don't treat it necessarily like grad school, like maybe treat it like a work project and it'll, allocate your time accordingly. Don't feel so stressed that you have to hit every hour and every meeting in the same way as your peers.
Guillermo, if it's okay, I want to go back to the question from Terry around like how people are divided into working groups.
Yes, I was going to come back to that one, but yeah, let's jump back into that. Yes, feel free.
Okay, so you will rank I think your top 3 choices in your application. And somehow last year it worked out where almost everyone was put into their first choice group, with a few people, I think Mullen was one, getting their second choice. So somehow that worked out. There was no like, bitter having to figure that out. Hopefully it's the same this year. But if it is, we'll figure it out. Yeah.
This one might be a question for you, Clara. Is there any logistical support for the study tour airfare and hotels? So
yeah, this is something we do for all of our study trips is we will share out ahead of time recommendations for lodging, and our staff will be staying at one of those places. We will share out documents around like ground transportation. So this really is you will be supported in getting to where we have to go. And then once we're there, we sort of travel as a group, and we'll get a lesson from our hosts on how to use the train, etc. And yeah, it will feel, I think Sadia, Mol, and Nicole, it felt pretty like, you know, you weren't on your own in getting to where you needed to go in Berlin.
Yeah, and some people chose to be very independent and stay wherever they wanted, but like we certainly clustered by default, which was also kind of cool. Like if there's 4 or 5 hotels that are recommended, then the group sort of gets divided, and you get to sort of get to know an entirely different group, if you want to, in our case, take the subway together to various, meetings and things like that.
a question here on, I guess, probably eligibility, or I guess maybe if you can please share more about the career stage eligibility, and that kind of years of experience, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think sometimes years of experience isn't the best marker, but maybe, I know we had people in our last cohort who had changed careers. So they were, maybe only a couple of years into their current career, but had done years doing something else. I think, definitely reach out to me directly if you're really not sure. But I think I'm encouraging everyone, don't take this as a hard and fast rule. Err on the side of applying, or, certainly reaching out to me.
Terrific. I think
There,
that might be
there was
last
another
question.
question above, and this could go over time, but for participants, what would you change about the fellowship? Before they respond, I do want to just acknowledge that this first cohort, bless their hearts, have been in many ways, not just the inaugural frontier group, but they're also in many ways the guinea pig. So we learned a lot from this first cohort that we're going to put into practice for the next one. We also really hope that this cohort stays involved, especially since we're continuing on with the topic of housing. But yeah, what are some words of caution maybe, or things you would want to change for Terry? Nothing, no, or words of wisdom.
I think we shared, some of, again, I would say that it's intense, but in a really robust way where you're going to learn a lot. So I think again, we got to learn what that actually looked like in terms of time commitment and can share that with you now. So I think sort of getting prepared for that, but get some sensible shoes. We do a lot of moving around, especially on the study trip. Yeah, and I think again, I think it was like 48 individuals, which, and I could be in a sort of a space where at any moment you sort of pivot a few degrees and start a conversation with whoever's next to you. I think that was like a really beautiful aspect of this particular group. You never know what the next 50, individuals will be, but I think, showing up, being open-minded, being respectful, being curious, all of these things are great. So I don't know that there needs to be change. I think we shared some sort of feedback, to the team independent of this, but structurally it's a good model. And I think for those who are sort of ready to take it on, it's going to be a great experience.
We do have time for a couple more questions if anything is coming up from people. And yeah, go ahead and throw it in the chat or unmute yourself. And while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions, I actually want to maybe turn to you, Guillermo, as someone who has been through many years at Urban Design Forum and run many fellowships beyond, the Global Exchange Fellowship that we're talking about now. Are there any other sort of pieces of advice or information you feel like would be helpful from your experience to share?
Right. I wouldn't say this group was entirely a guinea pig. I mean, we've been leading different types of fellowships over the course of a number of years, perhaps guinea pig for the Global Exchange Fellowship. But I think what I've learned over the past couple of years leading a number of different cohorts is really, I think even Nicole said it, throw yourself into it. These folks are coming from a variety of different backgrounds. I think learn from them. I think that's probably what keeps me sticking around, is meeting such an incredible vast network, both within each of these individual cohorts and our membership community. And I think it's intense. You'll probably be only able to kind of dedicate that time for within that fellowship for big swings. But I think there's so many other offerings at Urban Design Forum that you can participate in. We're leading 2 to 3 events per month, different opportunities from discussions, workshop formats to tours. I think we have an incredible network and leverage that when you're part of our community. So
Great, thanks, Guillermo. Words of wisdom. All right, so with that, then I'm going to say, unless any of the 2024 fellows wants to chime in with anything else, this is the last call for questions, and then we will close out. Stay in touch, please. Any individual questions, go ahead and email me, clara@urbandesignforum.org. Applications are due May 2nd. We will let you know by May 23rd. And if if this is not for you, maybe, but there's someone else please share. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you all so much for joining.
Take care. Bye.
And thank you so much to Malin, Nicole, and Sadia for taking the time to share about their experience today. Appreciate you all so much.
Anytime, Clara. Bye.
Bye, everyone.